Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to do Genesis and Jubilees. Again, comparing them, we're going to go through Jubilees chapters 14 to 16, which covers, again, we're in Abraham's life with covenants, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and tabernacles. Yes, tabernacles. If you're not aware that tabernacles started by Abraham, you're about to find that out. So, here we are. Okay, so the background is Abram has left his home. He established himself in Canaan. He and Sarai had to go down to Egypt because of famine. They started the Exodus story, and they came back, and Lot has split off to go down to Sodom. Okay, Lot got kidnapped, and Abraham fulfills the role as the kinsman redeemer for his family. And he rescues Lot and everyone else that was taken. So he's proven himself to be honest. He doesn't take spoils of war, loves his wife, cares for his family, saved his community from ravens, helped them to have plenty of food, even when Mastema wanted them to starve. Just the kind of patriarch to be given a very special covenant, which is what we're going to talk about here in the next chapter. Now, I have covered the covenants with Abraham and Noah in depth. More than we're going to today in the Feast of YAHUAH series. It's the part 1 video. It's on YouTube. Parts 2 through 5 are only available in our community for people who come and join us. So, let's get started with chapter 14. It says, "After these things, in the 4th year of this week, on the new month of the 3rd month, the word of Yah came to Abraham in a dream." Now, the dating is we're at the beginning of the 3rd month. So we're approaching Shavuot. And Abram has a dream. Yahuwah says, "Fear not, Abram, I am your defender, and your reward will be exceedingly great." And he said, "Yahuwah Almighty, what will you give me, seeing I go hence childless? And the son of Mesech, the son of my handmaid, is the Damascus Eleazar. He will be my heir, and to me you have given no seed." And Yahuwah said to him, "This man will not be your heir, but one that comes out of your own bowels will be your heir." And he brought him forth abroad, and said to him, "Look toward heaven, and number the stars, if you are able to number them." And he looked toward heaven, and beheld the stars. And he said to him, "So shall your seed be." And he believed in Yahuwah, and it was counted to him for righteousness. Now, we just finished talking about this some in our discernment training course, which is in our community for Freedom members, in the first segment on Melchizedek, and for discerning that situation, if you want to know more about it. These stories are pretty much the same in Genesis and Jubilees. I'm going to continue on with verse 7 in Jubilees. "And he said to him, I am Yahuwah that brought you out of Ur of the Chaldees to give you the land of the Canaanites to possess it forever. And I will be a sovereign ruler unto you and to your seed after you." And Abram said, "Yahuwah Almighty, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it?" And Yahuwah said to him, "Take me a heifer of 3 years, and a goat of 3 years, and a sheep of 3 years, and a turtle dove, and a pigeon." And he took all these things in the middle of the month. That was the end of their conversation. Abram was told to do something, and he does it. He heard what he was supposed to do, and he did it in the middle of the month, which is Shavuot. "And he took all these things, and he dwelt at the oak of Mamre, which is near Hebron. And he built there an altar, and sacrificed all these. And he poured their blood upon the altar, and divided them in the midst, and laid them over against each other. But the birds he divided not." Now, Genesis doesn't give you the dating of when this is happening at all. And that's one of the things that Genesis does, is it hides from you the fact that Abram and these the Moedim were started to be established long before Moses. Moses was a big reset event because everybody had become captive in Egypt for many generations, and some things had just totally been forgotten. But they had been started long ago. And Jubilees is one of the reasons I believe that they don't want you to read Jubilees, is because you would start to do things like what we're doing right now. Okay, if we have a prophet who says, I don't need sacrifices of animals, all the whole everything is mine, what can you give me except a contrite heart? Who is saying all this? I mean, this is an issue of cognitive dissonance. It is something that we're going to be discussing in our community quite a bit. Some of it, there will be some videos. Well, actually, my husband and I, we've already been talking about this some in our videos. If you watch the calendar episodes and listen to some of our teachings in the Moedim, you've heard our going down the bunny trail of animal sacrifices. Okay, verse 12. And the birds came down upon the pieces, and Abram drove them away, and did not suffer the birds to touch him. So this is the same kind of thing where he's fending off birds now from the sacrifice on the altar. Before he was fending off ravens from the seeds. Verse 13. And it came to pass, when the sun had set, that an ecstasy fell upon Abram, and lo, a horror of great darkness fell upon him. So in the Genesis it says a deep sleep. And I'm like, a deep sleep and an ecstasy are a little bit different. A visionary experience is a little bit different than a deep sleep. So they're just slightly different. And it was said to Abram, know of a surety that your seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and they shall bring them into bondage and afflict them 400 years. And the nation also to whom they will be in bondage will I judge, and after that shall come forth hence with much substance. And you shall go to your fathers in Shalom, and be buried in good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So Abram is being told about his future. He is becoming the instrument to do judgment upon the Canaanites, who were cursed and lived in Shem's land instead of going to their own, that was Canaan's lot. If you remember back in earlier chapters of Jubilees, Canaan was told, don't go there, that's Shem's land, but they did anyway. He was warned that all his descendants would be removed from the land, and here comes Abram, a descendant of Shem, who's going to take it back. Continuing in Jubilees, and he awoke from his sleep, and he arose, and the sun had set, and there was a flame, and behold, a furnace was smoking, and a flame and a fire passed between the pieces. So the covenant of fire. Now this goes into the Feast of YAHUAH, part 2. There's a covenant of fire from Genesis, and the fire itself is going between the pieces and will pay the price if the covenant is broken. Usually those making the covenant are required to pass through the parts and pieces, because if you break the covenant, then what has happened to the animals is going to happen to you. But Abram is not required to do this. This is a grant-type covenant, and these kinds of details are in the Feast of YAHUAH teaching, which is why I suggest you watch it. Continuing in Jubilees, verse 18. And on that day YAHUAH made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your seed will I give this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenites, the Kezanites, the Cadmonites, the Perizzites, and the Rephaim, and the Pharkarites, and the Hivites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Gigashites, and the Jebusites. Now, this word right here in yellow, I kind of stumbled over it. It is not anywhere to be found. I search, and I use all kinds of search engines, and it has been scrubbed clean. If you ever come across this word anywhere or any map, please let us know, because I can't find it. It's been removed, and it's not in Genesis. Okay, verse 19. And the day passed, and Abram offered the pieces, and the birds, and their fruit offerings, and their drink offerings, and the fire devoured them. And on that day, the fire devouring them should remind you of Eliyahu and his confrontation with the priests of Jezebel, and a fire coming down to accept everything that was on the altar. And on that day, we made a covenant with Abram, according as we had covenanted with Noah in this month. And Abram renewed the festival and ordinance for himself forever. Okay, full stop. Verse 20 right here is saying that the covenant of Noah, which Noah made back in Jubilees chapter 6, is being renewed with Abram on the day of Shabbaoth. The fact that this was done is missing from Genesis, which wants you to believe that this feast day started with Moses, that the covenant of Noah gets basically lost. It doesn't get lost, but it's not referred to that way. It's embedded in Leviticus and other books, the admonition not to eat blood. But I hope you study Jubilees chapter 6 so you'll understand what this is saying, because the calendar is part of what's happening right here. You see, Abram is receiving the calendar as well right now, because that covenant, the calendar was part of the covenant, and I have a teaching on that, a video on that. So, another thing is that Genesis is giving you the impression that Abram did nothing other than have one big vision. Okay? Abraham just has a big vision. They give you a little bit different. So Abraham has a covenant, the parts and pieces, he has his vision, and then the next thing we go into Sarai and Hagar. And I want you to notice the stark contrast in the character of Sarai, who becomes Sarah, because the two texts give you a much different impression of who she is. Verse 21 in Jubilees, and Abram rejoiced and made all these things known to Sarai his wife, and he believed that he would have seed, but she did not bear. Now, Genesis starts with, now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. Okay, so both texts admit that she hadn't had any children yet, but I want you to realize right now that no one came and told Sarai she was going to have the baby. All she knows, if Abram even talked to her, is that Abram is going to have children. Nothing was mentioned about it coming from Sarah at this point. Okay? And she's not getting pregnant. So in Jubilees, she understands that Abram is being told that he's going to be the progenitor, but she's not. She's not bearing children. So at some point, she's upset that she's not bearing any children, or she's, at this point just going, I'm an old lady. Why would I think that I'm the one that's going to do this anyway? Because she hadn't been promised anything. So in verse 22, and Sarai advised her husband Abram and said, go unto Hagar, my Egyptian maid. It may be that I shall build up seed unto you by her. No blame, no being upset, no saying anything snarky. So let's look at what Genesis says. It says, she had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, behold, YAHUAH has prevented me from bearing children. Go in to my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. So in Genesis, Sarai is blaming YAHUAH and saying he's the problem, that I'm not doing this. And in Jubilees, she is saying this because no one has promised it to her. Okay? And I'm just saying, they've stuck words here in Sarah's mouth, in my opinion. Okay. Jubilees continues, and Abram listened unto the voice of Sarai's wife, and said unto her, do so. And Sarai took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to Abram, her husband, to be his wife. And he went in unto her, and she conceived. Okay. And Genesis says, and Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan. Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian servant, and the same thing. Okay. Now, Genesis goes on with a dialogue that is not in the Book of Jubilees. And I noticed last week in the discussion group, I asked, have you started to see the difference in the characters of people in both books? And the answer was yes. So here we go again. So the King James says, and when she, Hagar, saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. And Sarai said to Abraham, may the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May YAHUAH judge between you and me. But Abram said to Sarai, behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please. Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. So this story is not in Jubilees, and it's Sarai is upset. She understood what was going to happen when she gave Hagar and suggested that Abraham take Hagar. So why would she say this? May the wrong done to me be on you. Okay. This doesn't really seem like, it seems like character defamation to me. Okay. Promises to Hagar at conception are missing. See, Hagar gets some promises in the book of Genesis that are not Jubilees. None of the story of Hagar being blessed by YAHUAH is here at Jubilees. Okay. And I'm just going to skip it. She goes off into the wilderness, and there's this, angel that comes to her and says that she's going to call his name Ishmael because YAHUAH has heard you in your affliction. It's a famous story, and I know that you've studied it, but it's missing in Jubilees. It's not there. And you have to ask yourself who benefits by having this story in Genesis. Ask yourself this. Okay. Jubilees. And bare him a son, and he called his name Ishmael in the 5th year of the week, and this was the 86th year of the life of Abraham. Now, for those of you who are studying with us and doing other studies at this exact week in time, just notice how Abraham's firstborn son is being named an El name. El will hear, as per the instruction of the angel. El. A lot of people want to trash and say things about the word El nowadays, and I'm just pointing out, you have lots of prophets with El in their name. You have two famous, real famous prophets, Eliyahu and Elisha, with El in their name. And Abram's first son is an El name. Okay. Now, Jubilees chapter 15, we have the covenant of circumcision, and their names are changed to Abraham and Sarah. So Ishmael is born, and then the covenant of circumcision is happening. YAHUAH appeared, I'm reading from Jubilees 15, YAHUAH appears to Abraham at the Feast of First Fruits. Realize this is Shabbaoth again. And in the 5th year of the 4th week of this Jubilee, in the 3rd month, in the middle of the month, Abram celebrated the feast of the first fruits of the grain harvest. This is Shabbaoth. And he offered new offerings on the altar, the first fruits of the produce unto YAHUAH, an heifer and a goat and a sheep and an altar, burnt sacrifice, their fruit offerings, drink offerings upon the altar with frankincense. We can also notice that there's not 2 loaves of leavened bread being offered and waved either. It sounds like the typical kind of sacrifice that they do. And YAHUAH appeared to Abram and said to him, verse 4, I am YAHUAH Almighty, approve yourself before me, and be you perfect. And I will make my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. And Abram fell on his face, and YAHUAH talked with him and said, behold, my ordinance is with you, and you shall be the father of many nations. Neither shall your name any more be called Abram, but your name shall henceforth be Abraham forever. And the father of many nations have I made you, and I will make you very great, and I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you. And I shall establish my covenant between me and you, and your seed after you, throughout the generations, for an eternal covenant, so that I may be a sovereign ruler to you, and to your seed after you, and the land where you have been a sojourner, the land of Canaan, that you may possess it forever, and I will be their sovereign ruler. Okay, so we've established that the dating from Jubilees of when this is happening. Now there is a covenant, not with YAHUAH, but with El Shaddai. You see, you can go into the King James, and It is El Shaddai talking to him. The covenant does not have any animal sacrifice requirements in it, but it is going to end up having an 8th day requirement for circumcision. This is the circumcision covenant. Now, this is a similar promise and covenant already made in prior chapters, and it's either being repeated again, or actually it's been extended, because now instead of one nation, there's many nations. But, Ishmael entered the picture, and Yahuwah didn't say, oh, by the way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who it comes from, or I want you to act on your own to cause a baby to come into the world. That really wasn't explained or discussed. Okay. This time, Abram will be many nations. Notice Ishmael is a son, but Isaac is not here yet. So already it must be plural. This covenant does not require... Okay, I've already discussed that. Okay. Now, he's not even sacrificing 10% either of anything on his altar. This little list right here. Abraham's a wealthy man and has many herds. Okay, continuing in Jubilees, verse 11. And Yahuwah said to Abram, as for you, do you keep my covenant, you and your seed after you, and circumcise you, every male among you, and circumcise your foreskins, and it shall be a token of an eternal covenant between me and you. And the child on the 8th day, you shall circumcise every male throughout your generations, him that is born in your house, or whom you have bought with money from any stranger, whom you have acquired, who is not of your seed. He that is born in your house shall surely be circumcised, and those you have bought with money shall be circumcised, and my covenant shall be in your flesh for an eternal ordinance. And the uncircumcised... Okay, I'll stop there. That's enough. Okay, the 8th day. Only the 8th day is the additional day to the Feast of Tabernacles. You see, if you think about a child on the 8th day, I've thought about this and the significance of it. Obviously, it is common practice for the young males on the 8th day to be circumcised. But the only time there is an 8th day celebrated is at the Feast of Tabernacles, which is... The Tabernacles is established, before we end this video, you'll see, by Abram, and Jacob establishes the 8th day. Jacob, who is named Yasharel on that day. See, Jubilees and Genesis are kind of different in places, in significant ways. We're going to study this out when we get to the great 8th day Moedim. This very statement is implying men of all ages who enter the Abrahamic Covenant, as Yasharel is about to enter the covenant going into the promised land. You see, just like Joshua does, as they cross the Jordan, every male is then circumcised as you go into the promised land. And the 8th day is about that. So I know I'm not explaining this really well, but I'm just trying to plant a seed because we're going to talk about it in later. Verse 14. I've turned it red for a reason in the background. And the uncircumcised male, who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin on the 8th day, that soul shall be cut off from his people, for he has broken my covenant. So it has gone all of a sudden from someone entering the covenant with knowledge to a baby being entered into the covenant by the parents. And if they don't get it just right, the baby's soul is cut off. I'd have a problem with that. The parents are responsible for doing this. The baby is not. What about the entire story of crossing the river Jordan with Joshua into the promised land? And all those men were not circumcised at 8 days either. Neither was the son of Moses. So just logically, some of this has to be... We have to wrap our minds around what this is really saying and what it's not saying. Because there's examples in the Torah of older men being circumcised, and it's okay. Their souls were not cut off when they were, when they were baby, because all of a sudden they weren't circumcised on the 8th day. If you have a different opinion, go ahead and put it in the comments on the video, or come discuss it with us on Monday night. But I've turned this little section red here, because the Torah does allow for people to join Yasharel later in their life. Okay. I went into this a little bit deeper. This is in the blue section here. The word for being circumcised in the YAHUAH looks to me like the innermost being is being connected to the leader shepherd for guidance and direction. So it is symbolic that you are entering into an agreement where you are going to be connected to the leader, which is Abraham and his house are being connected to the great shepherd here. Okay? Only Strong's says that this means to cut off something. I mean, I know circumcised means, okay, in the flesh, they cut something. We don't really believe that in Exodus, in Ezekiel, when Father says, you need to have your heart circumcised, that it's going to be, a surgery inside your heart and part of your heart's going to disappear. We don't, you don't go there. Abraham's covenant with El Shaddai is saying, in my viewpoint, when I looked at it from a YAHUAH or Paleo-Hebrew standpoint, that you must be set apart, not just in your flesh, but also in your heart, in your innermost being. What you are going to bring forth out of you will now be under my authority, leadership, and guidance, will be under the authority, leadership, and guidance of you've entered then the covenant with El Shaddai. So that's what I see. Okay, the next section in Jubilees, starting at verse 15, is about Isaac's birth, the promise of it. And Yahuwah said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, her name shall no more be called Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. And I will bless her and give you a son by her, and I will bless him, and he shall become a nation, and kings of nations shall proceed from him. And Abraham fell on his face and rejoiced, and said in his heart, shall a son be born to him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bring forth? And Abraham said to Yahuwah, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. And Yahuwah said, yes, and Sarah also shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Yitzchak, or Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him, an everlasting covenant for his seed after him. And as for Ishmael, also I have heard you, and behold, I will bless him, and make him great, and multiply him exceedingly, and he shall beget 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you in these days in the next year. Okay. So, Sarai is only now being promised the son Isaac after Ishmael is born, after that happened. I find it curious, as this is happening only 14 years later after Hagar was made fertile by Abraham, but now 14 years later he's thinking to himself that he's too old, and Sarah is now the chosen vessel. Sarah is said to be the vine, the branch where the everlasting covenant comes from. I'm going to share more on this with you in the community. Are we to believe that Abraham hears all this, his wife's name is changed, and she'd ask, are we to believe that at this point he does not tell her that she's going to have a baby of the covenant? Realize, it doesn't say here that Sarah was told anything yet, but do you think he's not going to tell his wife something? Because in the beginning of the next chapter, it is implying that 2 weeks later, she does not know. And I'm thinking, wow, if Abraham kept everything private to himself, what is he going to say to his wife as they have to go from this place to that place, or he's given all these promises. But anyway, two weeks later, Sarah apparently, according to the text, doesn't know, and I just find that a stretch. Okay. Starting in verse 22, Abraham circumcises his household. So he received the covenant. He received the promises for what's going to happen to Sarah. Her name is changed. And verse 22, and he left off speaking with them, and Yahuwah went up from Abraham, and Abraham did according according as YAHUAH had said to him, and he took Ishmael his son, and all that were born in his house, and whom he had bought with his money, every male in his house, and circumcised their flesh and their foreskin. And on the selfsame day was Abraham circumcised, and all the men of his house, and all those whom he had bought with money from the children of the stranger were circumcised with him. Okay. Verse 25. And what I'm about to read you for the next, all the way through verse 27, this is missing from Genesis. This Torah is for all the generations forever, and there is no circumcision of the days, and no omission of one day out of the 8 days, for it is an eternal ordinance, ordained and written on the heavenly tablets. And every one that is born, the flesh of whose foreskin is not circumcised on the 8th day, belongs not to the children of the covenant which YAHUAH made with Abraham, but to the children of destruction. Nor is there moreover any sign on him that he is YAHUAH's, but is destined to be destroyed and slain from the earth, and to be rooted out of the earth, for he has broken the covenant of YAHUAH his sovereign ruler. Now, this section is not Jubilees, but we should ponder how Moses is being given this at Sinai, where the 10 Commandments have the Sabbath day as keeping as a sign of a covenant. Of course, that is for all who are part of that nation, and this text is specifically about the land covenant made with Abraham. This is just illogical to me, because how is the baby's fate decided by his parents on day 8, that if they don't fulfill their obligations, their baby will be destined for destruction? This has no room for and no concept of a kinsman redeemer, our beloved Mashiach Yahushua, at all, or the fact that there are examples of other men coming into the covenant in their adult years. This is not consistent with the message of the prophets that I find, nor of the Torah, where a man is able to choose for himself life or death. I mean, babies don't have a choice. Joshua circumcised people when they went across the Jordan River and they entered the covenant. Abraham circumcised many adults. No prophet said circumcision was ever pointless. Father, via Ezekiel, said only those circumcised in heart and flesh would come in his presence. Yahushua was circumcised, of course, on the 8th day. Nothing in Matthew, James, and John about doing away with circumcision. So these are just some notes that I had made to myself when our local group was talking about this. Verse 27. For all the Malachim of the presence and all the Malachim of the sanctification have been so created from the day of their creation. Now, I found this a fascinating verse in Jubilees. I said, isn't it interesting that this is implying that the male angels are created with similar human male anatomy? Okay, because these angels are created on day 1. And if they have been so created, they were what? Created already circumcised. And in Enoch, including the Dead Sea Scrolls, Enoch is being described. Oh, Noah. I'm sorry, I should have said Noah. Noah is being described in 1st Enoch as being like the children of the angels at birth, implying that angels have babies. I mean, you just can't get away from these few things. And I just found this was really interesting that Jubilees is saying, I mean, if you've researched this out, please do share some comments. I would love to hear anybody who's researched this. Jubilees continues, and before the Malachim of the presence and the Malachim of sanctification, he has sanctified Yasharel, that they should be with him and his Kodesh Malachim. So this covenant is making them like the angels. Please do remember that Yasharel, the Yehudiath word, means the upright of El. And later in our Jubilee study, we're going to discuss how this name gets applied and used. None of this kind of commentary that we're verses that we're going over is in Genesis. And if you're listening to this as a podcast type of thing, you won't see that. But none of this is in Genesis. It doesn't match up to anything. 28. And do you command the children of Yasharel, and let them observe the sign of this covenant for their generations as an eternal ordinance, and they will not be rooted out of the land. For the command is ordained for a covenant that they should observe it forever among the children of Yasharel. Now, this is instructions being given to Moses to teach this, which obviously is in the Torah of the Tanakh. Verse 30. For Ishmael and his sons and his brothers and Esau, YAHUAH did not cause to approach him, and he chose them not because they were the children of Abraham, because he knew them, but he chose Yasharel to be his people. So approaching him, when it says did not cause to approach him, is the language of priests. This reminds me of priests approach the altar. Priests go into the holy place. I pray for the ability one day to see the real source text of Jubilees, to look at this for myself. If you have comments on verse 30, please add them. Verse 31, and he sanctified it and gathered it from amongst all the children of men, for there are many nations and many peoples, and all are his. And over all he has placed spirits in authority to lead them astray. You heard that right. To lead them astray. Okay. I pray for the ability one day, again, to see this text. I want to know what it says. This is in opposition to be a light to the nations. To Yahusha saying, I will draw all men to me. Okay? Are they're pushing, are these the principalities and powers that he placed in authority to lead them astray? I mean, I've wrestled with this verse in Jubilees before. Mastema could have been someone to say something like this. He placed evil spirits over territories to lead them astray. I'm wondering about this verse. That's why it's yellow. 32 is also yellow. It says, but over Yasharel he did not appoint any Malach or spirit, for he alone is their ruler, and he will preserve them and require them at the hand of his Malachim and his spirits and at the hand of all his powers, in order that he may preserve them and bless them, and that they may be his, and he will be theirs from henceforth forever. Now in Jubilees, there is no group designated as Yasharel at the Tower of Babel. All go astray until Abram is a child waking up to what is going on and seeking deliverance. That's what Jubilee says. The texts obviously trace lineage, and Abram is in the line of Shem. I put a question mark on this section as Jubilees 1 laid down the covenant and conditions for his return, and from the death of Noah to Abram, no one is fulfilling that until Abram himself cries out and seeks the Most High. You see, Abraham, in the beginning of his life, is doing what Jubilees chapter 1 says you need to do. I hope you catch that. Okay. I want you to remember that what I'm about to say is being spoken to Moses in his day. That's what Jubilees is. Verse 33, and now I announce unto you, Moses, that the children of Yasharel will not keep true to this ordinance. And they will not circumcise their sons according to all this Torah, for in the flesh of their circumcision they will omit this circumcision of their sons, and all of them, sons of Belial, will leave their sons uncircumcised as they were born. Okay, full stop. So this would be covering the time period from Moses upon the mountain to what we could say was when Joshua is having to circumcise all the males as they cross the Jordan. So descendants of Abram are now being called sons of Belial because they failed on the physical 8th day to do this for their babies. So does Yah's people become sons of Belial because they were not circumcised on the 8th day of their life, or because they come into a town and lead people astray into another religion, as is stated in Deuteronomy 13. You see, Deuteronomy 13 talks about who the sons of Belial are. And I've just been pondering this stuff here as I was reading through Jubilees and again preparing the video. Okay. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Verse 34. And there shall be great wrath from YAHUAH against the children of Yasharel, because they have forsaken his covenant, and turned aside from his word, and provoked and blasphemed, insomuch as they do not observe the ordinance of this Torah, for they have treated their members like the Gentiles, so that they may be removed and rooted out of the land. Okay, so not circumcising a son, according to this, is treating their members like the Gentiles. It's all relating to the male anatomy. Have you researched this for yourself? I'm going to talk about my thoughts more in the discussion. I have to keep moving. The next thing in this verse in Jubilees is missing from Genesis, and I've turned it red. It says, and there will be no more pardon or forgiveness unto them, so that there should be forgiveness and pardon for all the sin of this eternal error. I mean, Yahusha taught the only unforgivable sin is blasphemy of the Ruach HaKodesh, and not this. That's in Matthew 12:31. So I totally turned this red and said, man, I got a red flag right here, because these two texts really, to me, look like they're in opposition to one another. Okay, Jubilees chapter 16, last chapter. Sarah finally hears directly herself. This is not in Genesis. Verse 1, and on the new month of the 4th month, we appeared unto Abram at the oak of Mamre, and we talked to him, and we announced to him that a son would be given to him by Sarah his wife. Now, we already had this announced to him and Sarah back in verse 21 of the prior chapter, so why it again? I have this in red. I'm like, why is this happening again? Because this was already done. Verse 2, and I've turned this one yellow. And Sarah laughed, for she heard that we had spoken these words with Abraham, and we admonished her, and she became afraid and denied that she had laughed on account of the words. So given the history of how things can be written about women, and that's from my personal experience working in translations and things that I teach my students, Mary got a visit. Mary got a visit from Gabriel in person, so no, there was no laughing. Sarah is supposedly hearing all this apparently secondhand, and I put big question marks, like Abraham has not already talked to her. I find it very hard to believe he didn't. So she's laughing, and she is admonished for this. This just doesn't pass the smell test to me. It sounds like yet another slur against the matriarch of Yasharel. Verse 3, and we told her the name of her son. You see, you can pull verse 2 right out of the text, and it reads just fine, 1-3. Verse 2 just makes me go, something's wrong here. Verse 1 goes fine right into verse 3. As we told her the name of her son, as his name is ordained and written in the heavenly tablets, Isaac. So they didn't get a choice as what to name him. And that when we returned to her at a set time, she would have conceived a son. She's finally told by the angels herself what's going on. So Genesis diminishes Isaac's name to just laughter. And in Yehudah, his name refers to the power of Zodi righteousness and resurrection and statutes of Elohim. I did a very popular word study on Isaac's name. And I want you to realize that here in Jubilees, it's written on the heavenly tablets. So it's not going to be some, I hate to say it, mocking name or dinky little name. It's got power to it. Okay. I said, a note for future readers, be sure you learn how Strong's is a Babylonian concordance giving definitions based upon the usage of translators, and it's not a definitive ancient biblical dictionary. Be sure you study the name of the ancient language and the history of the development of modern Hebrew. This is something I do in our academy. Okay. Moving on. Now we have the visit from 3 before Sodom, that whole story. Jubilee says in verse 5, and in this month YAHUAH executed his judgments on Sodom and Gomorrah and Zeboim and all the region of the Jordan, and he burned them with fire and brimstone, and he destroyed them until this day, even as I have declared unto you, Moses, all their works, and they are wicked and sinners exceedingly, and that they defile themselves and commit fornication in their flesh and work uncleanness in the earth. And in like manner, YAHUAH will execute judgment on the places where they have done according to the uncleanness of the Sodomites, like unto the judgment of Sodom. Period. Stop. There is no 3 angels, no YAHUAH, nobody visiting Abraham. The text just goes and it simply says, and in this month, that would be month 4, this is what we did. We executed judgments. And it also says something else that's not in Genesis, that anybody who does this again, they're going to get the same judgment and the same thing will happen to them. Okay. So there's no story of Abraham pleading about anything. No one comes to visit him. They already know what they're going to do, and they do it. And they're and the angel's telling Moses, be warned, because if this happens again, it's been written down that the same thing will happen to them. So now I'm going to skip a whole bunch of stuff, you see, because it's not in Jubilees. There's all the very familiar thing you're used to, with Abraham having Sarah make food for them. And then they go on. This is where Genesis finally says, oh, and Sarah's laughing and she's going to have a son. It's in the middle of the Sodom story in Genesis. And another thing that Genesis says, YAHUAH said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? And I want you to pay attention really closely. Look at 17, 18, and 19. I've all turned yellow right here because there's confusion in these verses. If you are giving an exact quote of a person speaking, they are going to say that I may bring, so that I may bring what I promised. You see, it switches from first person into a third person. The tenses of these verses switches, which it should not. If this was an accurate text and a scribe is, faithful to what they're doing, then it should say I and me all throughout the quote, but it doesn't. Okay, and then in verse 20 of Genesis, it says, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great and their sin is very great, I will go down to see whether or not they have done altogether according to what's been told to me. And I said, Genesis is making it sound like YAHUAH has to come down to verify something is true. The Almighty already knows. There was no having to verify anything in the Tower of Babel. This really, when I first read this as an adult, I thought, man, this doesn't make sense. So Yahushua said, no one has seen my Father, John 6:46. And yet in the King James Masoretic text, you get the impression that Yah did come down and appear to Abraham in this text. And you're just like, no. Yahushua said no one's seen him. Okay. The thing goes on with all this interceding on Abraham's part for Sodom. None of that is in Jubilees. None. Jubilees picks back up, and it says, and this was kind of important, but Lot we saved, for YAHUAH remembered Abraham and sent him out from the midst of the overthrow. You see, in the story of Genesis, there's all this Abraham interceding for Lot. But Jubilees says that YAHUAH remembered Abraham, and for that reason, Lot was sent out of the midst of the overthrow. Now, Zakar, which is the Yehuda's Paleo-Hebrew word, remembered here, is Zakar. And Zakar is what is the name of the word male. As in Genesis chapter 1, he made them male and female. He made them Zakar and Nakaba. So Genesis 1 males are this word remembered. And it means the responsibility to act on behalf of someone else for their benefit. That's part of the ancient meaning of this word. So now Yah is going to act on behalf of Abraham, who can't be there to rescue Lot. There's no time for Abraham to go rescue Lot. So Yahuwah is remembering Abraham. He's acting on behalf of Abraham and sending Lot out, because that's what Abraham would have done. I don't believe all this stuff that's in Genesis. I just don't. Okay. I said, consider these. Abraham has proven himself to rescue, redeem people, and save the community. Abraham does zakar. He is like the male of Genesis 1. He does what he's supposed to do, and now Yahuwah is responding in his set-apart character. The likeness that males were supposed to have and demonstrate through actions on behalf of those around them. That's zakar. The likeness of men who see a woman under attack on the streets and acts on her behalf to rescue her, or the father who runs into a burning house to save his children from a fire. That's zakar. Or the man who leaves an inheritance for his children is acting on their behalf. Or who saves his daughter from deception of a vow contract that is not in her best interest. That's a zakar. Which acts of bravery and acting to lift others up is often memorialized. Remember, great stories are, there's memorials for people who acted with such bravery in our culture. And that's part of the meaning of the word zakar. Was not Yahuwah seeing the situation of his people were in Egypt and acting on their behalf? Even if they were complaining about the increased burdens from the Egyptians while they were being set free, he was acting on their behalf. He was zakar. Okay? And what does it say in Exodus 3:15? It says, "And Elohim, moreover unto Moses, thou shalt say unto the children of Yasharel, Yahuwah Elohai of your fathers, the Elohai of Abraham, the Elohai of Isaac, the Elohai of Jacob, hath sent me unto you. This is my name forever. This is my memorial unto all generations." And you see, I've turned that green because it's the word zakar. And now the consequence of what it means to be outside of the covenant, where there's no zakar. See, Abraham was zakar himself. He did lots of things, and Yahuwah was there to cover his back and help Lot when Abraham couldn't do it. So if you're not in the covenant, there's no zakar. I want you to understand this. Go to Hosea 4:6. "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject thee. Thou shalt be no priest to me, seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy Elohim. I will also forget thy children." The "I will forget thy children" is I won't zakar them. Think about that. Okay, Genesis continues with a bunch of stuff that's missing from Jubilees. All the story about Lot pleading with the angels, and the whole thing about offering his daughters to for unrighteousness to the crowd. Oh, you don't take the angels, just take my daughters. None of that's in Jubilees. None of it. There's all kinds of stuff that's just not in Jubilees. I wondered, out loud in our local fellowship, I said, did they just put all this in here to make Lot look really bad? I mean, because you do. Man, if you're a woman, you think, why is Lot called righteous at all? Where's the justification in the man who's going to say, rape my daughters and kill my daughters, but don't touch the angels, and he's righteous? It just, really I have a hard time with that. Because this doesn't fit in the tone of the story in Jubilees about the rape of Tamar either. We're going to get to that later. Okay. So now we get to the destruction of Sodom continued, and there's more stuff about Lot. Abraham seeing the destruction of Sodom from a distance, and Lot racing off to Zoar. That's not there. There's nothing about Lot's wife in Jubilees either. Okay, Lot and his daughters. It's the next section, and this is what it says in Jubilees, verse 8. And he and his daughters committed sin upon the earth, such as had not been on the earth since the days of Adam till this time, for the man lay with his daughters. And I thought to myself, well, let me just keep going. Verse 9, and behold, it was commanded and engraved concerning all his seed on the heavenly tablets to remove them and root them out and to execute judgment upon them like the judgment of Sodom and leave no seed of the man on the earth on the day of condemnation. Now there, I've turned this last verse red because there's no second or third witness to this, no explanation of their sin, and then justification for genocide of a people. I mean, that's what's happening. And I'm just like, how do I reconcile with this with don't go there because I gave the land to Lot and his seed? That's in Scripture. Does not flow with this. It doesn't flow with other parts of Jubilees. How to reconcile this with not be judged for the sins of the father? Each person is judged individually. I mean, this is hard to understand. And for Jubilees to say that he and his daughters are committing sin that has not happened since the days of Adam, then what was it they were doing? Unless they were doing the sin of the watchers. That's the only thing that I can see here. But the text does not say what they're doing. Okay? If ask yourself, do you believe that from before the flood, that from the days of Noah, after the flood, all the way till now, okay, to the days of Moses, that there was no incest? Do you believe that? Because Jubilees is asking you to believe that, and I find that hard. I mean, I'm not saying that Lot and his daughters didn't do something bad, but I think whatever it was is not being told to us right now. Okay. Put your thoughts in the comment. Jubilees, verse 10. And in this month, Abraham moved from Hebron and departed and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur in the mountains of Gerar. And in the middle of the 5th month, he moved from there and dwelt at the well of the oath. And in the middle of the 6th month, YAHUAH visited Sarah and did unto her as he had spoken, and she conceived. So Sarah conceives in the 6th month. This is happening at the well of the oath. She conceives. YAHUAH fulfilled his promise to her. And this is missing from Genesis. Not the fact that they were there, but the fact that this is happening and when it's happening. Okay. Now, what we have going on, because this is under the heading of Abimelech and Abraham, what we have going on in Genesis is, again, not in Jubilees. This whole story of Abimelech and Ahimelech is not there. This is, again, a story, the Abimelech, king of Gerar, of where supposedly Abraham and Sarah are lying to a king. She's my sister. We don't want Abraham to get hurt. This isn't exactly like what Genesis is telling in, remember with the Pharaoh when Abraham and Sarah had to go to Egypt. Okay, and it's missing in Jubilees. And in this story, Ahimelech is blaming Abraham for what have you done to us? How have I sinned against you that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me things that ought not to be done. I mean, Abraham is making Abraham sound like his character is really being smeared right here, if you ask me. That's my opinion. Because it's not in Jubilees, and it's not in the character I see of Abraham in other places. And when I've looked at the verses here in the King James, and I've looked at the words and where I trace them to, I end up back at the Garden of Eden. I mean, Abimelech, when he says you've done a great sin, it's whatever's going on in the Garden of Eden is the great sin. And he's basically saying, you are doing to me what was done in the Garden of Eden. And that was just, outrageous in my opinion. Okay. More text still missing, where Abimelech is giving and paying off Abram with thousands of pieces of silver for Sarah, and returns her and hasn't hurt her. And Abraham is getting rich off of another king. So Genesis makes both Abraham and Sarah look bad, and in fact elevates poor Hagar to victim status. I mean, you've got to consider the character development in these stories. Genesis also, in verse 18, I've turned this red, it says, for YAHUAH had closed all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Now, there's one way you could look at this and say, okay, and I'm just strictly staying within Genesis right now. YAHUAH's got to plague them and cause them to have some sort of extreme pain so that they do nothing to Sarah. Or you can look on it that Sarah's being blamed for what happened, which would be a character defaming her character. I could take this verse either way. Okay, Isaac is born is the next section. Verse 13 in Jubilees. And she bare a son in the 3rd month, and in the middle of the month, at the time of which YAHUAH had spoken to Abraham, on the festival of the first fruits of the harvest. We are at Shabbaoth, the feast where the covenants are fulfilled and celebrated, and that's when Isaac is born. Okay, Genesis is a little off, because it says in chapter 21, the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised, and she conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God had spoken. Well, there's, if you're following the timing in Jubilees, that cuts out the time. I'm not going to go backwards up all the pages, but I turned it red because it looked to me like the timing was off and all these events were happening in between. Abraham circumcises Isaac at the time that was ordained. And then Genesis throws in, and Sarah said, God has made me laugh for me. Everyone who hears me will laugh with me. Okay, and I've seen teachings where Sarah's name ends up meaning silly laughter, not her son's name, Isaac does. And I've done word studies on both Sarah's name and Isaac's name. I suggest you watch them because I just, the names are so slurred. And this is something I show my students in the academy when they take my beginning class. You're welcome to come check it out. Is all the slandering of the character of people through their names. Okay. And it says, and in the 6th year of the 4th week, we came to Abraham to the well of the oath, and we appeared unto him as we had told Sarah that we should return to her, and she would have already conceived her son. Here's Tabernacles. And we returned in the 7th month. Now, this is missing in Genesis. It can't even acknowledge the feast existing prior to Moses. They came in the 7th month, and we found Sarah with child before us, and we blessed him and announced to him all the things which had been decreed concerning him, and that he should not die till he should beget 6 more sons, and should see them before he died, but that in Isaac should his name and seed be called. Okay, these are promises being made to Abraham. And that all his seed of his sons should be Gentiles, and be reckoned with the Gentiles. But the seed from the sons of Isaac, one should become a Kodesh seed, and should not be reckoned among the Gentiles. For he should become the portion of the Most High. And all his seed had fallen into the possession of YAHUAH, that it should be unto YAHUAH for a people, and for his possession above all nations, and that it should become a kingdom of priests and a Kodesh nation. Now, this should sound really familiar to you. And this is not in the story in Genesis at this point, but it is in Jubilees. Because you have witnesses later on. I mean, Moses is hearing this on Sinai. And then Moses writes, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. See, he's taking what he's hearing and he's putting it, and there it is in Exodus in chapter 19. And there it is in 1 Peter chapter 2. But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and a holy nation, a peculiar people. I mean, there's 3 witnesses to this. Jubilees, Exodus, and 1 Peter. Verse 19 in Jubilees. And we went our way, and we announced to Sarah all that we had told to him. So now they actually go and tell Sarah the message, which is nice to see. Because remember the message, remember this message, all this stuff that's being told, and now. I mean, they came to Sarah, she's got a baby, and they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. Abraham and Sarah heard the message of a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. They heard the message of Isaac's seed would not be reckoned amongst the Gentiles. They heard the promises for Abraham, and they rejoiced. And he built there an altar to YAHUAH, who had delivered him, and who was making him rejoice in the land of his sojourning. And he celebrated a festival of joy in this month 7 days, near the altar which he had built at the well of the oath. Get the reason for the celebration. This is tabernacles. What you know is Sukkot or tabernacles. Verse 21, and he built booths. He built sukkahs for himself and for his servants on this festival, and he was the first to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles on the earth. Yes, Jubilees basically says it right there in plain English, and he was the first to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles on the earth. Here are the booths being built for people. Genesis is silent on all of this. Verse 22, and during these 7 days, he brought each day to the altar a burnt offering to YAHUAH. And it goes into all the things that he's bringing, and the thank offerings, and the goats, and burn all the fat. Verse 24, and morning and evening he burnt fragrant substances, frankincense and galbanum and stackel and nard and myrrh and spice and costum. And all these 7 he offered crushed and mixed together in equal parts and pure. So he's putting incense on the altar. And he celebrated this feast during 7 days, rejoicing with all his heart and with all his soul, he and those who were in his house. And there was no stranger with them, nor any that was uncircumcised. And he blessed his Creator who had created him in his generation, for he had created him according to his good pleasure. For he knew and perceived that from him would arise the plant of righteousness for the eternal generations, and from him a Kodesh seed, so that it should become like him who had made all things. And he blessed and rejoiced, and he called the name of the festival of YAHUAH, a joy acceptable to the Most High. And he blessed him forever, and all his seed after him through all the generations on the earth, because he celebrated this festival in its season, according to the testimony of the heavenly tablets. And for this reason it is ordained on the heavenly tablets concerning Yasharel that they should celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days in the 7th month, acceptable before YAHUAH, a statute forever throughout their generations. And to this there is no limit of days, for it is ordained forever regarding Yasharel, that they should celebrate it and dwell in booths, and set wreaths upon their heads, and take leafy boughs and willows from the brook to do it. And Abraham took branches of palm trees and the fruit of goodly trees, and every day going around the altar with branches 7 times a day in the morning. So every morning he's doing the pattern of the Jubilee. For 7 days he goes around the altar 7 times in the morning, praising and giving thanks to YAHUAH for all things in joy. I want to close this with, might your celebration of tabernacles just shift a bit and consider what was written here and what Abraham and Sarah did. So let's consider the pattern, and we're going to end this. Setting ourselves apart from sin and crying out for help. Choosing Yah, praying for deliverance, an immediate response. Help with the language, the word immersion, leaving Babylon. Receiving promises in a family, establishing covenant, your covenant family. Experiencing hardship. Experiencing Egypt, and whatever that looks like for you. Release and deliverance from the Pharaoh in your life. There's a split in the families, two sides of the Dead Sea. Understanding the role of the kinsman redeemer that Abraham plays out. Circumcision occurs. Sodom rises up and becomes so prominent and so bad it is judged and destroyed. The arrival of the promised seed and tabernacles. Meditate on this pattern. I hope that this video will help you. We're not at tabernacles yet, and if you're studying along with me, we've got a while to go before there's tabernacles, but I hope you have enjoyed this video. I've enjoyed doing it, and I get so excited when I talk about the Moedim and Jubilees because it really impacted my understanding of the Moedim a lot. I hope you enjoyed this. May Yahuwah Baruch you. Please comment on the video. It really helps. Please click like and share it with your friends. Shalom. More about the Melchizedek word in our discussion. I hope you have enjoyed this video, Jubilees chapters 12 and 13 on the story of Abraham. Please like and comment. It will help more people see this video. It really will, folks. If you want more people to study Jubilees, please do that. And if you want to study more in depth with us and have access to these PDF files, there's a link for a free trial to our community in the description. You have a wonderful day. Shalom.